Hey there, today we're going to be talking about the topic of race and ethnicity. Now, the U.S. is probably the most multicultural country in the world. I think that's been proven time over again. 14% of people here out of way over 300 million are 14% are foreign born here. There's approximately 150 ethnic groups and approximately 350 languages being spoke here. So a racial group is a group that shares the same physical characteristics. An ethnic group shares common national origin or cultural heritage. Now, a racial ethnic group has distinct physical and cultural characteristics. So, to get into some of the groups a little bit and what we call them, 70% of people like myself don't care if they're called Hispanic or Latino, but half prefer to be called by their country of origin. So in my case would be Mexico or Mexican. A similar number of people are indifferent about it, whether it be African American or black, but more than half of them, those people would prefer black. Same with Native American, American Indian. They'd rather be identified by their tribe, though they're kind of indifferent about what you call them outside of that. They would prefer to be Cherokee, Apache, and so on. So moving on, a little bit about immigration. The U.S. admits more than 1 million immigrants a year, which is more than any other country in the world. Though people are still divided on that, 63% people say immigrants strengthen our country, as you know, they've made many significant contributions in the past to things like in economics, medicine, chemistry, physics, engineering, technology. There's approximately 160 million people in the U.S. in the labor force, and 15% are lawful immigrants. And most of them tend to hold professional positions, managers and things like that. 5% of those are unauthorized immigrants. About 45% of people believe a growing number of immigrants have hurt workers overall, so there's always plenty to debate there. Are they a government burden? Yes and no. We can look at it through the different generations. First generation immigrants tend to cost the United States around $57 billion in things like healthcare and education, where second generation immigrants, those born of those first generation, cost around $30 billion. Now here's where it kind of changes up a little bit, because third generation people born whose grandparents were immigrants, the third generation pays about $224 billion in taxes. So that's where the debate lies. Overall, it's a good thing for the economy, but you have to look at it long term instead of short term. So about immigrants, they're also more likely to have two-parent households. They're more likely to have a parent with job security. They're more likely to earn a college degree, more likely to attend religious services, and also more likely to be job creators when we're looking at the percentages overall. As for less likely, they're less likely to be obese. They're less likely to be disabled. They're less likely to suffer chronic illness, less likely to commit crimes or have non-marital children. So moving on to some more of our important words, we have to look at the word dominant group. This is a physically or culturally distinctive group that has the most economic and political power, usually the greatest privileges and higher social status. A minority group is any group that may be treated different or unequal because of their physical, cultural characteristics. So now we're looking at things like gender, age, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, skin color. So we can also look at some extreme patterns from dominant minority group relations. One of those most extreme being genocide. This is a systematic effort to kill all members of a particular ethnic, religious, political, racial, or national group. One of the more extreme patterns is also segregation. This is physical and social separation of dominant and minority groups. It's really that simple. Moving on to like the blending of society now, we're going to look at acculturation. Acculturation is adopting language, values, beliefs, and other characteristics of the host culture, which is very similar to assimilation, except assimilation implies 100% conformity, as opposed to acculturation might be more like a lower number. So assimilation also includes intermarrying. So it absorbs rather than makes complete changes. Pluralism is an important one. Sometimes this is also called multiculturalism. I think this is a goal for a lot of people in society to coexist without necessarily conforming. I really enjoy that sort of environment, and I think a lot of people do, when people are free to be themselves. Now, some of the key words that can sometimes end up being controversial, because a lot of times the definition is lost when there's mixed emotions thrown in here. So we'll start with prejudice. Prejudice is just simply internalizing, it's prejudging people in a negative way. And that could be for whatever reason, religion, orientation, could be just a preference of who you want to be around. So it can be seen as a negative thing or kind of an indifferent thing. Now, discrimination is like an action. So it's prejudice, but the action of prejudice. Discrimination treats people unequally. Now, to further confuse things or clarify things, we have racism. Now, racism is a lot like discrimination, except it treats people unequally. Except racism does it. There's also a power imbalance present. Much like I mentioned with sexism, when a man is in power and authority over a woman, he can commit acts of sexism. So that's mainly the difference between like discrimination and racism, except racism is just about race, but it treats people differently, and there's an implied power imbalance there. Another key word here, while we're talking about race and ethnicity, is stereotypes. These are oversimplified or exaggerated generalizations about a group of people. This can be positive or negative. I don't think I need to go into detail and provide examples of stereotypes. I think there's plenty of that on television, internet, things like that. Now, the last important vocabulary word we need to discuss is institutional discrimination, or sometimes people talk about institutional racism and don't quite understand what that means. It's basically an unequal treatment because of societies or an institution's everyday laws, policies, practices, and customs. So we can set up an organization, an institution, or sometimes society can be set up to have policies that sort of favor some groups over others. That's what we mean when we're talking about institutional. And now we're going to get into some of our theories on race and ethnicity. So looking at it from a macro functionalist perspective, you could say that immigration provides needed workers. Acculturation and assimilation increase social solidarity. Some would say also increases social mobility. Race and ethnic inequality can be dysfunctional, but benefits dominant groups. So this ignores a lot of the other perspectives, as we've gone into some critical theories as well, looking at it from other perspectives. Conflict theory. There's ongoing strife between dominant and minority groups. We have, of course, conflict theories about the privileged and the haves versus the have-nots, the proletariat and bourgeoisie. And a lot of times our societal functions can favor one group or another. So this is where we're talking about conflict theory. Feminist theory would state that minority women specifically suffer from the combined effects of racism and sexism. Gendered racism occurs within and across all racial ethnic groups. And then we have a symbolic interactionist perspective. Race is socially constructed. So social interaction can increase or decrease the amount of racial tensions and things of that nature. So it's more about the individuals interacting with each other. So we've gone through enough previous chapters to know what the criticisms generally tend to be of each theory. Conflict theory ignores systematic structures. Feminist theory ignores some of the other ones as well. And symbolic interactionism doesn't necessarily look at systemic racism. It just looks at the interaction between individuals. So that's all we're going to talk about for now. We'll see you next time.